Jack Reacher had no particular destination in mind. That was the point. The destination was the journey itself, a continuous line drawn across the map of a country he had once sworn to protect. He stepped off the dusty, air-conditioned bus into the shimmering heat of Desolación, Arizona. The name was fitting. It was a place that felt forgotten by time, a handful of low-slung buildings huddled together against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Sonoran Desert. The air was dry and smelled of dust and distant creosote. He hadn't planned to stop here, but through the grimy window of the bus, he'd seen a sign for a diner called The Oasis that promised coffee as black as night and pie as good as your mother's. Reacher didn't have a mother to compare it to anymore, but he knew good coffee when he tasted it. It was reason enough. With a folded toothbrush in his pocket and the clothes on his back, he had everything he needed. He started walking toward the diner, his heavy boots kicking up small puffs of ochre dust. The town was quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy, like a held breath. People on the street moved with a certain slowness, their eyes downcast. They glanced at him, a stranger, a man of his size and bearing, with a flicker of something that wasn't curiosity. It was fear. Reacher had seen that look before, in war zones and failed states. It was the look of people living under an occupation, even if they didn't know it. He entered the Oasis. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale grease and strong coffee. A few locals were scattered at the booths, nursing mugs, speaking in low murmurs. They all stopped when he walked in. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, they returned to their conversations, but the rhythm was off. They were aware of him. A young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Maria approached his table. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Black," Reacher said, "and a slice of whatever pie is freshest." She nodded and retreated behind the counter, moving with the same deliberate, cautious energy as everyone else in town. Reacher watched the street through the large plate glass window. He saw a late-model black SUV with tinted windows cruise slowly down the main street, its engine a low, predatory growl that was out of place among the battered pickup trucks. It didn't stop. It just made its presence known. A patrol. Maria returned with his coffee and a slice of apple pie. The coffee was strong and bitter, just how he liked it. The pie was decent. As he ate, he noticed a man in one of the booths staring at him, not with aggression, but with a kind of desperate intensity. The man was older, his face a roadmap of hard years, his hands calloused and stained. He looked like a farmhand or a laborer. After a few minutes, the man slid out of his booth, dropped a few crumpled bills on the table, and walked out without looking at Reacher again. But on his way past, he let a folded napkin drop to the floor near Reacher's table. It looked accidental. Reacher knew it wasn't. He waited a full minute, finishing his coffee, before bending down to pick it up. He palmed it, paid his bill with cash, and left a generous tip for Maria, who seemed surprised. Outside, the sun was relentless. He walked down the street, away from the bus station, and unfolded the napkin. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 4 words. "They took my son." Reacher stopped. It wasn't his problem. He had no ties here. He could walk back to the bus station, catch the next ride out, and forget Desolación ever existed. That was the smart thing to do. The easy thing. But the words on the napkin, the fear in the diner, the predatory glide of the black SUV, it was a puzzle, and Reacher hated leaving a puzzle unsolved. It was a defect in his character. He turned and walked back toward the diner, not to go in, but to watch from across the street, melting into the shadows of an awning. He wanted to see who was pulling the strings in this silent, fearful town. He didn't have to wait long. 2 men got out of a dusty pickup truck and walked into a small grocery store next to the diner. They were big, not Reacher big, but wide and thick with muscle that came from intimidation, not hard work. They swaggered. A few moments later, the owner, a small balding man, came out with them, his face pale. He was shaking his head, pleading in a low voice. One of the men laughed, a short, ugly sound. He backhanded the owner across the face, a casual display of power. The owner stumbled back, holding his cheek, his eyes filled with shame and terror. The two men got back in their truck and drove off. No one on the street reacted. They just kept their heads down, as if they hadn't seen a thing. Reacher's jaw tightened. This was more than just a quiet town. It was a cage, and he had just rattled the bars. He crossed the street and walked into the grocery store. The owner was behind the counter, trying to pretend he was arranging a display of canned peaches. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "You okay?" Reacher asked. The man flinched, not looking at him. "Fine. I'm fine. Please, just buy what you need and go." "I don't need anything," Reacher said, his voice low and even. "I saw what happened." The owner's eyes snapped up, wide with panic. "You saw nothing. Understand? Nothing happened. Now get out of my store." "Who were they?" "Get out!" the man hissed, his voice trembling. "You want to bring more trouble? For me? For yourself? Leave this town. It's not for you." Reacher held the man's gaze. He saw the terror there, but underneath it, a deep, simmering resentment. This man wasn't just scared, he was broken. Reacher turned and left the store. He knew he couldn't get answers from the victims. He had to go to the source. He needed a name. He walked back to the diner. Maria was clearing his table. "Another coffee," he said, sitting back down in the same booth. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and something else. Curiosity, maybe. "You shouldn't stay here," she whispered, pouring the coffee. "Why not?" "This place, it's not good. Bad things happen to strangers who ask questions." "Like the man who dropped the napkin?" Her hand trembled, sloshing a bit of coffee onto the saucer. She quickly wiped it up. "I don't know what you're talking about." "His son." Reacher pressed gently. "What happened to him?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. She looked around the empty diner. "His name is Hector. His son, Ricardo. He worked at the packing plant. He saw something he shouldn't have. He told his father he was going to talk to Sheriff Brody about it. He disappeared that night. That was 2 months ago. Hector has been handing out those notes to any stranger who looks like they might be able to do something." "What packing plant?" "Vance Packing. It's the only real business in town besides the farms. Owned by a man named Elias Vance. He owns everything. The land, the jobs, the sheriff." Reacher had his names. Vance. Brody. "And those 2 men from the pickup truck?" "They work for Vance. His private security, he calls them. They're his enforcers. They collect his taxes and make sure everyone stays in line. Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Go, before they notice you." "They've already noticed me," Reacher said. As if on cue, the same pickup truck from before pulled up and parked in front of the diner. The 2 men got out. They didn't swagger this time. They moved with purpose. They were coming for him. "Stay behind the counter," Reacher told Maria, not taking his eyes off the door. He stood up, feeling the familiar cold calm settle over him. The bell on the door jingled. The 2 men stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind them. They spread out, flanking him. The bigger of the 2, a man with a tattoo of a snake on his neck, cracked his knuckles. "You're new in town," Snake Neck said. It wasn't a question. "We don't like new." "I'm just passing through," Reacher said calmly. "Your bus is leaving," the other one grunted. "We suggest you be on it." "I like the pie here," Reacher replied. Snake Neck smiled, a humorless baring of teeth. "You've got a smart mouth. That's a bad thing to have in Desolación. Mr. Vance, he values peace and quiet. You're making noise." "I haven't said a word." "Your face is making noise," the second man snarled, stepping forward. "Time to go." He reached out to grab Reacher's arm. It was a mistake. Reacher moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He sidestepped the grab, seized the man's outstretched arm, and twisted. There was a wet snap as the elbow joint dislocated. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. Reacher didn't let go. He spun, using the man's body as a shield and a battering ram, slamming him into Snake Neck. Snake Neck stumbled back, surprised. He was reaching for something under his jacket, but he was too slow. Reacher shoved the screaming man forward, let him go, and closed the distance in a single stride. He delivered a short, brutal jab to Snake Neck's throat. The man's eyes bulged, and he staggered back, clawing at his neck, unable to breathe. Reacher followed up with a headbutt that connected with a sound like a coconut splitting open. Snake Neck dropped to the floor like a sack of cement, unconscious before he hit the linoleum. The first man was on his knees, clutching his ruined arm, whimpering. Reacher stood over him. "Who is Vance?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "What is he doing here?" The man just shook his head, tears of pain streaming down his face. "Go to hell," he spat. Reacher grabbed him by the hair and pulled his head back. "Wrong answer." He looked around the diner. Maria was huddled behind the counter, her face white with shock. The other patrons were frozen in their booths. Reacher dragged the whimpering man outside and dumped him on the sidewalk next to his unconscious partner. He looked up and down the street. No one was watching. No one ever was. He went back inside. "Call the sheriff," he told Maria. She stared at him, her eyes wide. "Are you crazy? Brody works for Vance. He'll arrest you." "I know," Reacher said. "That's the plan." Sheriff Brody arrived 10 minutes later. He was a big man running to fat with a sweaty face and small, shifty eyes that didn't meet Reacher's. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who was used to being in charge and didn't like surprises. The two goons were still on the sidewalk, one moaning, the other stirring. Brody surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. He looked at Reacher. "You caused this disturbance?" "They were disturbing my meal," Reacher said. "I ended it." "You're under arrest," Brody said, his hand going to the butt of his gun. "Assault." "They assaulted me first," Reacher said. "Ask the waitress." Brody didn't even glance at Maria. "I'm not asking anyone. You're a vagrant, a troublemaker. I'm locking you up." "Good," Reacher said, and to the sheriff's surprise, he turned and placed his hands behind his back. The jail cell was small, damp, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. The heavy steel door clanged shut, the sound final. Reacher sat on the thin mattress of the metal cot and waited. He wasn't in Brody's jail. Brody was in his. The sheriff thought he had contained the problem. In reality, he had brought it right into the heart of his operation. Reacher didn't have to wait long, an hour, maybe two. The sky outside the small, barred window was turning a bruised purple when he heard footsteps. It wasn't Brody. The footsteps were lighter, more measured. A key turned in the lock, and the door swung open. A man stood there, flanked by two more guards who were better dressed and more professional-looking than the thugs from the diner. The man in the middle was in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed absurd in the Arizona heat. He had silver hair, a tanned, handsome face, and the cold, dead eyes of a shark. This had to be Elias Vance. "Jack Reacher," Vance said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Former Major, 110th Special Investigations Unit, recipient of the Silver Star, a Defense Superior Service Medal, a Legion of Merit, and a Soldier's Medal. Quite the resume for a man who drifts from town to town with nothing but a toothbrush." Reacher didn't react. "You've been busy." Vance smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I believe in knowing who I'm dealing with. It's good business, and you, Major, are bad for business." He stepped into the cell. The guards remained in the doorway. "I own this town. I provide jobs. I maintain order. It's a delicate ecosystem. You come in here, a bull in a china shop, and you start breaking things." "Your boys were harassing people," Reacher said. "My boys were maintaining the peace," Vance corrected. "Sometimes that requires a firm hand, something a military man should understand. I'm giving you a choice. Sheriff Brody can lose the paperwork on your assault charge. We can drive you 20 miles out of town, and you can continue on your way. You forget you ever saw Desolación. In return, I forget I ever saw you." "And the boy?" Reacher asked. "Ricardo, the one who disappeared." Vance's smile tightened. "Unfortunate accident. The desert is a dangerous place. People get lost. He talked to Brody before he got lost. The sheriff has a bad memory, as should you. Vance's voice dropped, losing its polished edge and taking on a core of steel. I am not asking you, Major. I am telling you. You have no idea what you're stumbling into. This is bigger than some small-town power play. These are dangerous, serious people I work with. They don't like witnesses. They don't like complications. Right now, you are a complication I can handle. Don't become a problem I have to solve permanently. You run a packing plant, Reacher said, his tone conversational. Fruits? Vegetables? What's so dangerous about that? Vance just stared at him for a long moment. Take my offer, Reacher. It's the only one you'll get. Walk away. He turned and left, his guards following. The cell door slammed shut again, the lock turning with a decisive click. Reacher lay back on the cot. Vance had made two mistakes. The first was telling him how dangerous his partners were. That meant there was something to hide, something worth killing for. The second and more crucial mistake was leaving him in the cell. It gave him time to think. Ricardo saw something at the packing plant. He was going to tell the sheriff. He disappeared. Vance owns the plant and the sheriff. His partners are dangerous. It wasn't about fruit. The plant was a front, a logistics hub. The trucks that rolled out of there loaded with produce were carrying something else. Drugs were the obvious answer, but it felt bigger than that. Vance's level of control, the sheer weight of the fear in the town, it spoke to something more organized, more insidious. He needed to get out. The lock on the cell door was standard issue, but the building was old. He examined the cot. It was bolted to the floor, but the frame was welded steel. He lay on the floor and braced his feet against the wall. He gripped the bottom of the frame and pulled. He was strong, but the bolts were deep in the concrete. He grunted, the muscles in his back and shoulders bunching into knots. The metal groaned in protest. He pulled again, a sustained, brutal effort, sweat pouring down his face. With a screech of tortured metal and a crack of old concrete, one of the bolts ripped free. Then another. The cot tilted, now loose from the floor. It was heavy. He lifted it, using it as a battering ram. He slammed it against the door. The sound was deafening, a booming clang that echoed through the small building. He hit it again and again, aiming for the lock mechanism. The metal of the door began to buckle. The frame started to give. On the 10th hit, the lock assembly shattered and the door flew open. The station was empty. Brody was probably at home, confident his prisoner was secure. Reacher walked out the front door into the cool desert night. The town was asleep, shrouded in darkness and secrets. His first stop was the diner. He moved through the back alleys, a shadow among shadows. A light was on in the apartment above the oasis. He found a fire escape and climbed. He tapped lightly on the window. Maria opened it, a kitchen knife in her hand, her face pale with fear. When she saw it was him, she gasped. "How did you get out?" "The door was unlocked," he said, climbing inside. "I need your help. You said your brother, Ricardo, worked at the plant. Did he ever say anything specific? Anything he saw that was unusual?" She shook her head, still trying to process his presence in her small apartment. He was quiet about his work. He was saving money to leave this place. But a few days before he disappeared, he was agitated. He said the trucks were wrong. Wrong how? He said they were loading crates of lettuce, but the weight was wrong. The manifest would say 10,000 pounds, but the truck felt heavier on the scales. Much heavier. He said it didn't make sense. He mentioned seeing extra pallets hidden under tarps being loaded late at night when the regular crews had gone home. He thought it was smuggling. Drugs, maybe. It fit. But Reacher's instincts told him it was more than just drugs. The level of control, the resources Vance had to investigate him so quickly. It pointed to a cartel, a powerful one. "I need to get into that plant," Reacher said. "Is there a way in besides the front gate?" Maria hesitated, then nodded. Ricardo said there was a drainage culvert on the south side. It runs under the perimeter fence. He used it once to sneak out early, but it's dangerous. The plant is patrolled. Everything is dangerous, Reacher said. Where is it? She drew him a quick, simple map on the back of a napkin. The plant was 2 miles out of town, a sprawling complex in the middle of nowhere. Reacher memorized the map. Thank you, Maria. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone. He left the way he came, dropping from the fire escape into the alley. He moved quickly and silently through the sleeping town, heading out into the desert. The moon was a pale sliver, providing just enough light to see the road. The air was cool and crisp. The 2 miles passed quickly. The Vance packing plant was a fortress. A 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded the entire complex. Bright security lights bathed the perimeter in a harsh, white glare. Reacher could see 2 guards patrolling the fence line, armed with rifles. He circled around to the south, keeping low, using the sparse desert scrub for cover. He found the culvert exactly where Maria said it would be. It was a large concrete pipe, 3 feet in diameter. The opening was covered by a heavy iron grate. It was rusted but thick. He gripped the bars and pulled. They didn't budge. He repositioned himself, found better leverage, and pulled again, his entire body straining. With a low groan of rusted metal, the grate shifted. He pulled harder, and it scraped open just enough for him to squeeze through. The pipe was dark and smelled of stagnant water and decay. He crawled on his hands and knees, the concrete rough against his skin. After about 50 yards, he saw a faint light ahead. Another grate. This one opened into a drainage ditch inside the fence. He pushed it open and slid out, his senses on high alert. The main building was 100 yards away, a massive windowless warehouse with several loading bays. Most were dark, but lights were on in the last 2 bays on the far end. He could hear the low hum of a refrigeration unit and the distant sound of a diesel engine. He moved toward the building, sticking to the shadows, his movements fluid and economical. He reached the side of the warehouse and crept along the wall toward the active loading bays. A tractor trailer was backed up to Bay 4. Men were moving around it, their voices low and urgent, speaking in Spanish. These weren't the local thugs. These were professionals. They moved with quiet efficiency, their bodies lean and hard. They were all armed. Reacher found a stack of empty pallets near the bay and concealed himself behind them. From his vantage point, he could see everything. They were loading crates of produce onto the truck, just as expected. But as he watched, a forklift emerged from the depths of the warehouse carrying a different kind of pallet. This one was shrouded in a heavy black tarp. The men guided it into the very front of the trailer, then quickly walled it off with crates of lettuce and tomatoes, burying it deep within the legitimate cargo. Reacher waited until the truck was almost fully loaded. He needed to see what was under that tarp. He needed proof. He watched the guards' patrol patterns, timed their movements. When their backs were turned, he slipped from behind the pallets and silently climbed up onto the loading dock. He slid into the back of the truck, moving behind the last stack of crates. The air inside was cold and smelled of fresh earth and chlorophyll. He made his way to the front, to the hidden cargo. He lifted a corner of the tarp. It wasn't drugs. It was a crate, not of produce, but of military-grade hardware. He could see the stenciled markings: M4 carbines, grenade launchers, C4 plastic explosives. This wasn't a smuggling operation. It was an arsenal on the move. Vance wasn't just working with a cartel, he was their chief arms supplier. He was arming a private army for a war. Suddenly, a voice shouted in Spanish from outside the truck. "Who's in there?" The loading stopped. Footsteps pounded on the metal ramp of the trailer. Reacher dropped the tarp and flattened himself in the narrow space between the crates and the trailer wall. 2 men entered, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The beams swept across the stacks of produce. Reacher held his breath, every muscle coiled. The beams got closer. He knew he had seconds before they found him. He exploded from the shadows. He took out the first man with a single, disabling blow to the temple. The second man had time to yell, a sharp cry of alarm, before Reacher was on him. He disarmed him, smashing the man's wrist against the wall of the trailer, and silenced him with a chokehold that was quick and final. But it was too late. The alarm had been raised. Shouts erupted outside. Men were converging on the truck. Reacher was trapped in a metal box with a dozen armed sicarios waiting for him. He grabbed the rifle from the man he'd disabled. It was an M4. He checked the magazine. Full. He peered through the gap between the crates. He could see at least 8 men taking up positions around the loading bay using equipment for cover. They were professionals. They weren't rushing in. They were preparing to turn the trailer into a kill box. "Come out, Americano!" a voice called, the accent thick. "Come out, and we might let you live." Reacher didn't answer. He scanned his surroundings. A metal box. One way in, one way out. A terrible tactical position. But the truck had wheels. He crawled over the crates to the front of the trailer. He found the small access door to the sleeper cab. It was locked. He used the butt of the rifle to smash the latch. It took 3 powerful blows. He squeezed through into the cab. The keys were in the ignition. The driver had been careless or confident. He started the engine. The powerful diesel roared to life, the sound echoing in the cavernous warehouse. Outside, the sicarios were confused for a second. Then they understood. They started firing. Bullets hammered against the cab, shattering the side windows. Reacher ducked low, slammed the truck into gear, and stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, pulling away from the loading dock with a screech of tortured metal. The sicarios scattered as the massive vehicle lunged into the warehouse. Reacher wasn't trying to escape through the front gate. He was aiming for the wall. He smashed through stacks of pallets and equipment, the truck acting as a 50,000-pound battering ram. He braced himself for impact. The truck hit the corrugated metal wall of the warehouse with a cataclysmic crash. Metal shrieked and tore. The whole building seemed to shake. The truck plowed through, emerging into the desert night, trailing sparks and debris. Reacher didn't slow down. He steered the battered truck away from the plant, bouncing over the rough desert terrain, bullets pinging off the trailer behind him. He had the truck. He had the weapons. He had the proof. And he had a war on his hands. He drove for a mile before abandoning the truck, concealing it in a deep arroyo. He took one of the rifles and several spare magazines. He knew Vance and his people would be hunting him now with everything they had. They would assume he would run, try to get to the feds. They wouldn't expect him to come back, which is exactly what he planned to do. He circled back toward town, moving through the desert with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years in hostile territory. He needed to get to Maria. She was the only civilian who knew he was involved. That made her a target, a loose end. He reached the edge of town as the first hint of dawn was coloring the eastern sky. He didn't go down the main street. He used the alleys, the backyards. When he got to the diner, he saw it. The black SUV was parked out front. 2 men stood by the door to Maria's apartment. They had her. Reacher felt a cold rage settle over him. This was no longer just about uncovering a crime. It was personal. Vance had crossed a line. He had taken a hostage. Reacher wasn't an investigator anymore. He was an executioner. He knew where they would take her, the packing plant. It was Vance's stronghold. Reacher faded back into the alleys. He wasn't going to storm the place. He was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, man by man. He waited until full daylight. The plant would be operating, the day shift arriving, providing cover and confusion. He found a perch on a rocky outcrop overlooking the main gate. He watched as Sheriff Brody's cruiser pulled up, followed by Vance's car. They went inside. They were all there. All the key players in one place. Reacher began his infiltration. He used the same culvert as before. This time, he was armed and prepared. The plant was on high alert. Guards were everywhere. He moved with ghost-like silence, using the noise of the machinery to cover his movements. He found a maintenance ladder that led to the roof. From there, he had a bird's-eye view of the entire facility. He saw them take Maria into a small office building attached to the main warehouse. Vance, Brody, and a man Reacher hadn't seen before, a man who carried himself with an air of lethal authority. This was the cartel commander, the real power. Reacher knew a frontal assault was suicide. He had to create a diversion. He saw a series of large propane tanks near the power generators, a single well-placed shot. He raised the rifle, sighted in, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet punctured the tank, and the escaping gas ignited with a massive explosion. A fireball erupted into the sky, shaking the ground. Alarms blared. Workers screamed and ran. The guards were thrown into chaos, their attention drawn to the fire. It was the diversion he needed. He scrambled down from the roof and moved toward the office building amidst the confusion. He took out 2 guards who were running toward the fire, using a silenced pistol he'd taken from one of the sicarios in the truck. He reached the office building, kicked in a side door, and entered the corridor. He could hear voices from a room at the end of the hall. Vance's voice, angry and strained. "Find him. I want him found." Reacher moved down the hall, his rifle at the ready. He kicked open the office door. Vance, Brody, and the cartel leader were there, and Maria tied to a chair. The cartel leader was the first to react, drawing a pistol. He was fast. Reacher was faster. A single shot, and the man dropped. Brody fumbled for his gun, his face a mask of terror. "Reacher, don't! We can make a deal." "The deal's off," Reacher said, and fired again. Brody fell back against the wall and slid to the floor. Now it was just Vance. He stood behind Maria, pulling a small pistol from his jacket and pressing it to her head. "It's over, Reacher. Drop the rifle or she dies." "All this for what? For some girl? For a town that doesn't matter?" "You're wrong," Reacher said, his voice deadly calm. "It all matters." He kept his rifle trained on Vance. It was a standoff. Reacher saw the flicker in Vance's eyes, the moment of decision. He knew Vance was going to shoot Maria and then try for him. Reacher had to act in that split second. He dropped his rifle, a deliberate act of surrender. For a fraction of a second, Vance's eyes shifted from Maria to the clattering rifle. It was the opening Reacher needed. He lunged forward, covering the 10 feet between them in an instant. He knocked Vance's gun hand aside as it fired, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. Reacher drove his shoulder into Vance's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him back against the wall. The pistol clattered to the floor. Vance was no fighter. He flailed, trying to push Reacher away. Reacher hit him once, a hard, precise blow to the jaw. Vance's head snapped back and he collapsed unconscious. Reacher turned and untied Maria. She was shaking but unharmed. "It's over," he said softly. Sirens wailed in the distance. The explosion had brought the state police, the feds, everyone. Reacher knew he couldn't be found here. He was a ghost, a vigilante. The law had its own way of dealing with men like him. He led Maria out the back of the building, away from the approaching chaos. "The truck," he said. "The one I took last night. It's in an arroyo a mile east of here. The weapons are inside. Tell the police everything. Tell them about Ricardo. Tell them what Vance was doing." She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude and a question. "Who are you?" "Just a guy passing through," he said. "Go. Be brave." She hesitated, then ran, disappearing into the scrub. Reacher watched her for a moment, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. He melted back into the desert, leaving behind the fire, the bodies, and the wreckage of a criminal empire. An hour later, he was on a highway, miles away. The sun was high and hot. He didn't look back. The sirens were long gone. The silence of the desert had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was peaceful. He had given Desolación its voice back. He heard the rumble of an approaching truck and stuck out his thumb. The war was over. It was time to move on.